I rise in the House today as the proud Member of Parliament, honoured to be speaking on behalf of the residents of Davenport. I will be speaking in strong support of 1, Canada ratifying the Paris Accord, and 2, supporting the March 3, 2016 Vancouver Declaration, agreed to by all premiers and territorial leaders. Mr. Speaker, Davenport is ready. We look forward to Canada ratifying the Paris Accord, if it is the will of this House, and achieving our COP21 targets. We look forward to the finalization of the details of the Pan-Canadian framework that was established as part of the Vancouver Declaration, and that the Minister of Environment and Climate Change is currently negotiating in Montreal with no doubt great zeal and urgency. And Mr. Speaker, Davenport is ready to step up to the plate to do its part. Let's start with a short recap. As we all know too well, climate change is an urgent global priority. International action to address climate change has gained momentum over the last few years, culminating in the successful adoption of the Paris Agreement late last year at the 21st Conference of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Paris Agreement aims to limit the global average temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius, with efforts being made to keep it below 1.5 degrees. It also has provisions to improve our resilience and adaptation to the effects of climate change. Meeting these goals will require action by all countries, particularly when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Canada formally signed the agreement in New York City this past April at a ceremony held by the United Nations Secretary General. Mr. Speaker, it was a momentous day. 175 parties signed the Paris Agreement on International Mother Earth Day, which was April 22nd. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon declared, "We are in a race against time. Together, let us turn the aspirations of Paris into action so that the spirit and solidarity of Paris lives again." He then urged all countries to move quickly so that the agreement can enter into force as early as possible. And now, just over 5 months later, I'm hoping that Canada will be moving as quickly as possible forward to ratify the agreement and joining a number of other leading countries in bringing the agreement into force in time for this year's 22nd United Nations Climate Change Conference to be held in Marrakesh, Morocco in November. Mr. Speaker, it's important to note that for the Paris Accord to enter into force, the agreement must be ratified by 55 parties representing at least 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions. As of today, 62 parties have ratified, representing 52% of global emissions. So we're still not there yet, and Canada, by ratifying the Paris Accord, will move the world closer to the Paris Accord coming into force. Now, ratification is but one key step. We all know that we need to take urgent, big action right here in Canada. Earlier this year, in early March, the Prime Minister met with the First Ministers and Indigenous leaders in how we can collectively and collaboratively work together to meet the COP21 targets and agreed to establish a Pan-Canadian framework to address climate change. This is now called the Vancouver Declaration. Upon reflection, Mr. Speaker, this was a historic moment. After 10 years of almost no action by the previous Conservative government, the Prime Minister met with all the provincial territorial leaders and Indigenous leaders, and they unanimously agreed to work together for the benefit of all Canadians. I want to pause to recognize what I think is a minor miracle that this meeting and the subsequent outcome took place. There was the vision of our Prime Minister and the great desire by all First Ministers to assemble and to sit at the same table to discuss how to move forward together. This is leadership. It was a historic moment, to be sure. Here's what the Prime Minister press release said after the First Minister's meeting was over. Building on the commitments and actions already taken by the provinces and territories and the momentum from COP21 in Paris, we are moving forward toward a Pan-Canadian framework for clean growth and climate change that will meet or exceed Canada's international emissions targets and will transition our country to a stronger, more resilient, low-carbon economy while also improving our quality of life. The Vancouver Declaration laid out a process for federal, provincial and territorial collaboration to create a pan-Canadian framework for clean growth and climate change. It established 4 key working groups. The first was clean technology, innovation and jobs. The second was carbon pricing mechanism. The third was specific mitigation opportunities. And the fourth was adaptation and climate resilience. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to let you know that the working groups have completed their final reports, which will be soon made public. And today, as I mentioned earlier, our Minister of Environment and Climate Change is in Montreal, and together with the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment is reviewing the reports, which will be ultimately provided to the First Ministers for their deliberation. All of these recommendations will be discussed at the next First Ministers meeting to be held in early December, where I hope the final details of the pan-Canadian framework for clean growth and climate change will be finalized. A framework that will lay out key measures and commitments by federal, provincial and territorial governments and will enable us to meet our national climate change target by 2030. Mr. Speaker, it's also important to note that the minister is incorporating the ideas and suggestions made by Canadians who made submissions online or via a town hall. I'm pleased to let you know that I hosted a town hall in Davenport. In fact, I actually held 2 environment and climate change town halls. They were both packed. I knew it would be of great interest to the residents of Davenport, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, they had a lot to say. So here's what I heard. I heard that Davenport is ready. Davenport riding strongly supports the Canadian government stepping up to the plate and taking leadership on the environment both nationally and internationally. Davenport supports an ambitious agenda to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Putting a price on carbon is vital to this transition. By now, Davenport residents will have heard the Prime Minister's announcement earlier today that the pricing for carbon pollution will be set at $10 per tonne in 2018 and rise $10 each year to $50 per tonne by 2022. Revenues will be neutral for the federal government, and any revenues generated stay in the provinces from where it came. I believe this is good news for Davenport and good news for Canada. Mr. Speaker, during the town halls, I also heard that Davenport is ready for good-paying jobs. We know that moving towards a low-carbon economy will create the kind of jobs we want to have while creating a better future for all of us. Putting a price on carbon pollution will encourage innovation, will bring the good-paying jobs that Canadians are seeking. And as our Prime Minister said earlier today, if we do not take advantage of the opportunities before us, we do a great service to all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, Davenport is ready to do its part. We know that taking action on climate change, reducing greenhouse emissions, transitioning how we live, think and work is a shared responsibility, and Davenport is ready to be part of the solution. We support increasing the use of renewables, encouraging more urban agriculture, reducing food waste and eliminating packaging. We support boosting the number of bicycles, electric and alternative fuel vehicles on our roads, and improving the efficiencies of our home and buildings. Davenport is ready for a timeline, a game plan of how Canada will move forward towards a low-carbon future, how we will transition to using renewable, clean energy. Shimon Peres, one of the founding fathers of Israel, who sadly passed away just last week, said in an onstage interview at the World Economic Forum in January 2014 that the world is moving faster than ever before, but the opportunity before us is that we get to shape the world that we live in. The challenge of our time is indeed climate change, but with leadership at the national level, leadership at the provincial and territorial level, working hand in hand with Indigenous peoples across Canada, and with Canadians like the residents in Davenport stepping up to do their part, I have no doubt that working together we can reduce our emissions substantially, we can transition our behaviour, transition our lives, and we can meet Canada's COP21 targets. Our Prime Minister said earlier this afternoon that when Canada is faced with a problem, we lean in, we work together to solve the problem, and we live up to our commitment. As we enter the 150th anniversary year of this wonderful country that we're all blessed to call our home, we are asking all Canadians to lean in, to work together, and do all we can to create a better future for our children, our grandchildren, and for generations to come. In today's challenging times, we are called to live up to the motto of Canada. Actually, it's the motto of the Order of Canada, but it still applies. Desiderantis meiorem patriam. They desire a better country. We indeed do desire a better country, and as our Prime Minister always says, in Canada, we can always do better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.